All right, everyone, welcome back. Today we're talking about TV dinners, hamburger helper, mystery casseroles, and whatever the hell that stuff was inside those Jello molds. So, Chris, as the show will make you do, I was actually looking through an old photo album as we were cleaning out our closet the other day.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, I was laughing pretty hard because now that we're closing in, right, on our first 30 episodes of this show, many of the photos that I was looking at were, exactly what you and I had been talking about, right? Everything from bicycles to horrible clothing to bad haircuts to just, oh my God, all the stuff we've gone over ad nauseum for however long we've been doing this. But one of the things that I saw in there was a picture of one of my grandma's famous open house events. And for those of you listening in, the open house, I don't mean I'm selling my house and so we're doing an open house so people can come over. Back in the day, usually more of the older generation, right? This was mostly your grandparents, I think. They would just have this once-a-year event called open house. And that just meant all their friends and family members could come by and say hi. Today, we would call it a party, right? Or a barbecue or something.
Right.
But back then, that's what they called it. Yeah. And I was looking at the photos of the food. You might be wondering, well, Jeff, how could you be doing that? Surely it was just a bunch of people standing around. No. Even back then, you guys, photographing your food was very popular, right? We talked about the bad photography techniques that, normally took place back in the 70s and 80s. And for whatever reason, you always had that person in the family that was obsessed with taking pictures of plates of food, normally half-eaten food in the most unappetizing state it could possibly get in. Hey, Dad, was there really a reason why you wanted to take a picture of a steak, with juice dripping off the side of the plate onto the tablecloth and a big glop of mashed potatoes on top of it? Did you really think that later on generations would revel in that photography, that choice there? Anyway, I'm looking, Chris, at this table, right? And it's got, beautiful tablecloth, antique table, spare no expense to impress the friends that are coming over for the open house. And some of the food looked really good, but a lot of it was stuff, Chris, that to this day makes me cringe. But back then it was so popular. And I'm, of course, going to open up this conversation with the Jello mold. Oh, my Lord. And the one that I saw in the picture, it looked hideous. It was a guacamole colored, pastel-y green slimy goop with mystery objects in it. Some, Chris, actually poking out of it. Thank you. And that was something that you were expected to just dig right in and not ask any questions and shove that goo down your throat. Do you remember the Jello molds being just extra prevalent with your mom?
I remember the Jello molds. And I think also, if you were lucky, I remember what was contained within the Jello mold. And if you were lucky, you saw something that may be recognizable, like a marshmallow. It's like, okay,
Right.
I think that's a marshmallow. The rest of that crap, I have no idea. Right? And so, yes, I'm going to... And I think the funny thing is, like, if I recall correctly, there was it didn't look like it, but there was a certain amount of preparation to make Jello. I think you had to, you might even have to, boil the water and put it on the pan, on the stove. Right.
Uh-huh.
And then you put it in and they had to stir it up. And it's just like pure sugar, and then these molds, just made for these specific things like Jello. And then, throwing, I don't know, marshmallows or raisins or whatever you would think, whatever they had in the cabinet. Right. And it was a ton of effort for a really poor payoff. Right. Because it didn't. If it tasted like anything, because often it would just be the texture. It's like, there's really no flavor to this. I think this is cherry. but it's not. It's like red dye number 9 or something like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and anything you put within that Jello lost all of its flavor and lost all of its individual texture. So you may have been actually chewing something that wasn't even supposed to be there. Maybe the pan wasn't clean enough when they started using it. But,
Exactly.
but it was an enormous effort for a really poor payoff, because it wasn't even like, okay, yes, it's this gesture of here's my Jello mold. And at the same time, it's like, oh man, I am starving. I'm hungry. Yeah, I'm going to have some Jello. And it's not like it did anything to satiate your hunger 5 minutes later. It's like, you want something else? Oh, I'm full. I had some Jello. And like I had the equivalent of solidified air that was like, that was like kind of shiny and kind of gooey, but I'm sure it had no nutritional value.
No.
And it had no just food value. It was like, it was literally, it was like a napkin ring or something like something on a plate, in the sense like, well, it's just an appendage. It's a plate. It's like, it's nothing is going to, that doesn't do me any good to have
It's the
Jello.
gelatinous equivalent of kale. You're not supposed to actually eat it. You know, it was just meant to look pretty, but, and people would really kind of compete with each other. Well, my God, did you see what Ebba put in her Jello? And you're just looking in there going, what in God's name is that? I see, bits and chunks of fruit. Like you said, I think that's maybe coconut floating around in there. God, hopefully that is coconut and not, just stray toenail clippings. What is that in there? And then, the other challenge was what color that doesn't occur in nature can you make this thing glow with, right? And bright green and blue. And oh God, the worst though, Chris, was the opposite. The people that went minimalistic and they had transparent Jello.
Right.
What was, oh my God, it was so horrible. It just was the most unappetizing thing. And to your point, you could eat an entire Jello mold and not feel like you've eaten anything at all, right? It had no nutritional value and certainly did not fill you up.
Am I eating cellophane here? But I mean, I think those were and these open houses, yes, that our grandparents would have. And these, like I said, these parties that most normal people will call it, or maybe they called it a potluck, right? Because everybody brought something over in a pot. But they would march into the homes carrying these like a gift, right? And I don't want to denigrate anybody, because again, there was a lot of effort, and it was the culture and it was the time. But it was like, in retrospect, again, in these big glass Pyrex or Corningware dishes, right?
Yeah,
Everybody remembers the Corningware. Everybody had that white, those white ceramic dishes with the little blue flowers on it. At the same time, but if it wasn't a Jello mold, maybe it was a casserole. Now, maybe after all this time, I should have looked up, what does casserole actually mean? What is the definition? But it was literally, to me, it was like, pull out all the shit in your refrigerator and let's whip it up into one of these trays and cook it or bake it. And all I know about the casserole is no matter what was in it, the surface always looked the same. It was kind of burnt, kind of crispy, kind of brown. You couldn't tell what was in it. Was it a tuna casserole? Was it a chicken casserole? Was it a green bean casserole? It was a fucking casserole. And of course, the casserole engineer was usually never around, so you couldn't even ask. So I'm going to be the equivalent of like going in the treasure box and pulling something out. I'm gonna stick my fork into this thing and see, I'll cut off a little square. And as a kid, right, we always had to force shit down. It's like your parents like, just eat it. It's okay. It's good. You'll enjoy it. And you're like, no, I don't want to eat this. Right? I don't.
Yeah.
But there was an obligation to eat it. There was a sort of point where it's just like, if you don't, you're gonna be insulting your grandma or your grandma's neighbor or your neighbor down the street. And it was like, all right, I'm going to cut a piece of this casserole and hope for the best. Yeah. Right? Because you couldn't tell what it was by looking at it.
You nailed it, man. The surface of the casserole was going to usually be of no help. It usually looked, absolutely to your point, it looked like what I imagine Pompei looked like right after the volcano eruption. It was just rivers of cheese swirling with pools of sauce, and God knows what's under there. And I love that fact that, you and I had the same experience. You would as a kid, know that you have to eat it. You're at this polite event or whatever it is, and you cut it open, and now you're trying to almost like, you're trying to be, Quincy, the Jack Klugman character, right? Where you're
Nice
trying
pull.
thank you. You're trying to do the forensics on it to go, what is that? Because God damn it, if that's broccoli, so help me God, did they try to squeeze broccoli in there? But yeah, the casserole was really just a hodgepodge, Chris, to your excellent point of probably whatever was left over in the kitchen there. And many, many times it had the most common staple of all time, right? The one that every 70s and 80s kitchen had to have, which was ground beef. My effing God, hamburger was a staple of cooking back then, way more than it is today, in my opinion. Hamburger was everything, right? I mean, Chris, name a few things you can even think off the top of your head, which are hamburger recipes that you had to have 3 or 4 times a week as a kid.
Well, first of all, there was hamburgers. There was meatloaf, okay? There were meatballs, right? But then all these offshoots of hamburger, maybe you could make tacos, okay, or the equivalent, or that generation's equivalent of tacos. Let's see, what else could you make with hamburger? Well, if you had hamburger helper,
There you go.
which in a sense was, well, hey, get some hamburger and we'll take care of the rest. Now, the helper, again, what was in the helper? We didn't read labels back then. There was no nutritional requirements. It hadn't have to tell you about ingredients or calorie count or fat content or anything like that. I think they were probably listed on there, but nobody ever read them. So again, you're kind of going on faith. You had a little packet. Maybe there was some spices of some sort. I don't know, some sort of seasoning. You put that in a bowl. Hamburger helper. Guess what, kids? What's for dinner? It's like, well, it's hamburger helper, right? Maybe all these offshoots, and then to the point of like the hamburger helper, because then you could make, I don't know, all the things you can make hamburgers. You can make sloppy joes, right? What is in a sloppy joe?
Ooh, yeah, yeah.
But again, you take some beef, maybe you take some hamburger, and again, the hamburger back then was not grass-fed. It wasn't organic. It wasn't, it wasn't free range. It wasn't any of those things. And it wasn't, like maybe 90% lean and 10% fat, whatever. So it was all the things that contributed to the myriad of health problems that people had in the, 50-year-old people looking like 70-year-old people in the 80s.
Al Lewis.
So, but yeah, exactly, Wilford, Brimley. But those things to the point of like, Jeff, start with some hamburger. You got some hamburger helper? You got some buns? You got some bread? You got something? And you were off, right? And again, this is what, and you're at school and you're a Little League practice and you're whatever, and this is what you come home to. You're gonna eat it. Nobody had any food allergies. Nobody had celiac disease. Nobody was gluten-free. Nobody was any of those things to the point of like, okay, so we're all just kind of, and I'm not saying those things didn't exist, but they just weren't diagnosed. So everybody just ate that, and and maybe it was in a pan with some chopped up corn and carrots, or again, maybe it was wrapped in what passed for a tortilla back then, or on a bun. But
well, that's a whole
right.
different subject. Yeah, the tortilla. Yeah, we'll get into that.
Right, hamburger and you're off. Spam and you were off. Did you ever have spam?
I never did back then, but I have to say, I do have a new appreciation for it. It's nothing that I would normally buy. I don't go actively seeking out spam, but, later on, traveling and going to Hawaii, for instance, where spam is a staple. I mean, it's a big thing, and tried it almost just as a joke and realized, oh, this actually tastes good. It's delicious. I love it. Spiced ham. There's nothing wrong with it at all, for God's sake. I mean, you can imagine as a kid, when you see it come out of its tin and it has a giant, again, back to gelatinous, a giant gelatinous layer of goo that is somehow part of the spam experience when you used to unfurl it from its, metal tomb back in the day. Do you remember that? It had this like super gross,
Absolutely.
fatty, clear, just, but God, it actually tastes really good. I admit. Yeah, I've been turned on spam. It's pretty good.
and yes, you could go to Hawaii and you can, man, spam. There are lots of spam recipes. I think there was like last time I was in Hawaii, I think there was a spam, like, I want to say there was a spam restaurant, like a spam, like, fast food place. Or that was their specialty anyway. And the problem I had with things like spam, or the problem I had with these, I guess maybe the foods that come off the shelf as opposed to the foods that come out of like the refrigerator, and I'm not talking about pasta or something like that, or in a jar, but something that's like a meat kind of product, or even like Velveeta cheese. And, again, I worked, and it's well documented, I worked in a supermarket, and every once in a while someone would ask, hey, where's your Velveeta cheese? And be like, yeah, that's on aisle 8. And they would stop and go, isn't it with the other cheeses? And I'd be like,
I'm sorry. Did you think it was a cheese?
Right. It's not a cheese. I hate to burst your bubble after all this time. And in fact, it's right next to the lard, which is definitely not a cheese. Okay.
Right.
But the thing is, there were also cheeses that were not cheeses, right? There was cheese food, the Kraft singles, the Kraft and the little cellophane. And it's like, that's not very cheesy. Okay. You may think you're eating cheese and you're not eating cheese, right? All of those things that you think you were eating, but those, a lot of the things with, whether it was Hawaiian Punch or High C or Sunny Delight, and what was their advertising hook? Do you remember what they would always say about these juices? These juices?
Well, and even Chris, I know what you're going to say, and even recently with things like Juicy Juice, right?
Mm-hmm.
The claim is so carefully worded for legalese, which is made with real juice. But that doesn't mean that there has to be 99% real juice. You can have a particulate of real juice in there and then technically make the claim that it's made with real juice. Yeah, sure. That's one of the ingredients. The other ingredients came from Chernobyl, but actually have, pretty delicious qualities. So that's what we use,
That's how we got around. But again, at the time, so those ones, but see, they put that out front and they flipped it, just what you were referring to, probably to, and this is what they had to get around eventually, made with real juice, when they realized that saying something 10% juice, we're going, okay, I got 10% juice. That's great. That means it's 90%
something
not
else.
Juice.
Yeah.
Right?
Juice-like.
Right. Juice-like. It's sweet. It tastes like a juice. It looks like a juice. It's even packaged like a juice. And guess what, kids? When we bought it, we were into it. And even our parents were like, yeah, it's good enough. It's 10% juice. It's juice, and I think all of those things, there was a bit of a con, that was perpetrated on because of that, because of the foods, the way they were prepared, the way they were, and again, it's progress, it's all the regulations, it's the FDA, it's all of those sort of things.
Yeah.
But in regard to like I said, the food that wasn't refrigerated, like a Hunt's snack pack. Do you remember those?
Oh, Hunt's. Oh, yeah, that was
those
huge.
Were putting in like a little pop top, like you're opening a can of soda.
Yeah.
And it was and unfortunately, it was like about the size, and even the texture is like cat food. I think it was even the same container. They just slapped another label on it. Or, of course, the contents were different, I hope. So, again, the non-refrigerated foods, to me, were they were just pushed on us to no end, like a spam.
Chris, you just made me remember that. That's right. The Hunt's pudding treat.
Mm-hmm.
It came in a tin with a pop top, an aluminum pop top that was not unlike opening up a can of Purina for your cat, right? I mean, that was the same kind of a container, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly what I said. It was, yeah.
Oh, yeah, and you're absolutely correct. And I love it because it had all the same sharp edges. It was just brutally dangerous if you were to accidentally touch it to your tongue or, God forbid, brush it up against your fingers. You were going to get the gnarliest paper cut of all time. And by the way, total sidetrack here. We never brought this up, but how many people would you estimate, and we'll never know, died from the era of the pop top, where every can of soda had a pop top? But instead of it being the modern version that came around, I think in the late 70s, early 80s, where the actual lever that opened the can
went down and back up. Right.
Yeah. Back in the old days, you would pull the whole thing off. And then what would everybody do, Chris? They would stick it in the soda. hey, I don't want to throw this away anywhere. I'll just put it back in the soda. And then, of course, what did they do? They would drink it, swallow it, choke to death, and then everyone else would move on with their lives, right? I think it was even in an episode of Emergency with our good buddies, the EMTs, Ronnie Gage and Roy DeSoto. Thank you.
Johnny Gage. Nice pull.
Johnny Gage. Oh man,
pull.
Chris. Oh, Chris,
50%
you get the full pull points on that.
Randolph, Mantooth, and Kevin Ty, if we want to go by.
You son of a bitch. All right,
Thank you
get
very much.
full points for that, man. I tried
I took that pull from you.
Oh my Lord, you pulled my pull. Gross. Well done, sir. Yeah, and so I think we're seeing a theme here, though, right? Which was number one, food. Yeah, it wasn't very healthy. Number two, I love what you said about gluten and celiac and all those other things. It's really funny today when you hear people go, that's interesting that nobody seemed to have a problem with gluten back in the day, and now all of a sudden everyone does. No, dumb shits. People had problems with gluten. They just didn't know that it was gluten, right? Nobody had figured that out, right? It's just, it was still a problem. It had nothing to do with whether or not people had the problem. They did have the problem. It went undiagnosed, but I always think that's very funny. But yeah, the simplest staples were what we used all the time. Fake cheese, because it was creamier and more delicious. And by the way, Chris, I mean, there are giant sections of the United States to this day where if you want to try to use any kind of a fancy real cheese on macaroni, right, you're high. It has to be Velveeta, right? I mean, it's just, that is the way things are done. And in general, hamburger was the big thing, but what else? Rice. Rice was the other big thing, right? That the cheapest food staple you can possibly buy. And of course, who came along, Chris, to help us with that?
That was Rice-A-Roni, the San Francisco treat. Because when I think of San Francisco, I definitely think of rice. Okay.
Right.
I don't think of where it comes from. I don't think of, are there a lot of rice paddies in the Bay Area? Do they grow? I mean, I know they make wine and they have vineyards. Tell me about all the rice that comes out of San Francisco.
Between you and I, Chris, there could be a giant rice industry in San Francisco that I'm unaware of. But no, last I checked, they don't have giant rice paddy fields in San Francisco. No.
Right. So, I mean, that, but, and I don't know, unless that was just a veiled inference to Chinatown. But Rice-A-Roni, you're right. Rice-A-Roni, the absolute equivalent of what? Of hamburger helper. It's like, oh shit, what am I going to make for the kids tonight? I don't have any hamburger, but I've got rice. Do I have Rice-A-Roni? Which now I'm guessing we could make our own Rice-A-Roni. Because you make rice and it's like, I'm going to make Spanish rice, right? Or I'm going to make a basmati rice, or so you can make that. And I don't think these rice could. But again, it was like, here, just whip open, make your rice, rip open your packet, dump it in, follow instructions, simmer low, whatever. And there was your meal. Okay. Yeah. And we didn't argue it. We didn't think, what the hell is in it? I mean, I think from my standpoint, it was better than a casserole. It was better than a Jello mold. It was better than some of those things you may have seen at one of these open houses. But again, looking back on it, and maybe now we're just easier because we can cook stuff that's actually a little bit more like, because of microwaves and because of, you can go to Trader Joe's and find just about anything that you can microwave this, you can throw in a pan, you can make broccoli beef, or you could make anything that, you wanted to make in that regard. That we couldn't really do back then because a frozen pizza back then was pure hell.
Oh my God.
Okay. These frozen pizzas were it's like, you know what? I'm not that hungry.
Well, hold on. Let's talk about that for 1 second. Yeah. Frozen pizzas back in the 70s and 80s. Jesus Christ. I mean, I'm surprised that Italy is even talking to us to this day. That is just an abomination, right? The frozen pizzas that you could get back in the 70s, just an ice brick that is suggestive of dough and sauce. It's pizza-like would be the best thing that they could ever put on that damn label. Oh my, atrocious. And by the way, I hate to say it, but even when you went to our favorite locations like Straw Hat and Shakey's and Square Pan and Pizza Hut, I don't know, maybe Pizza Hut and Square Pan are a little bit better, but in general, man, we had a lot to learn over the years about the making of pizza and what tastes good and what doesn't, right? Holy shit, was that a bad attempt?
Well, I like to think that a Shakey's or a Straw Hat was for a birthday party or
Of
after a
course.
Little League game or something like that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you generally didn't see a family of 4 eating at Shakey's. If you did, you're like, oh man, you couldn't do any better than this, right? Because the pizza was like so bad. But you were watching Laurel and Hardy or right the Marx Brothers or the Three Stooges or whatever they had. You were definitely. I think the Chuck E. Cheese was kind of the modern equivalent because nobody really went there for the pizza. They went for everything else. But it was so bad. You're right. And so Pizza Hut pizza, square pan pizza, which we knew that had a short but legendary life in our adolescence. So again, pizza to me, but the frozen ones were awful. It was just like, oh, can I have or maybe I'll just have a sandwich, right? Or maybe could I have a TV dinner? And I think again, we know we touched on TV dinners once before, but just in passing. But the TV dinner was kind of cool, and I can even remember going out, and if I was at the store, and I got to maybe pick out my own TV dinner, right? So you got to pick whatever it had in it, and it may have had a little, and you were looking at the best one had the best dessert, maybe it had a little brownie or something like that as well.
Oh, yeah.
Think about that for a second. So it had those compartments, and you had the main dish, which may have been like chicken or some sort of quote unquote beef, and then it had like a vegetable, like a corn, and then it had some sort of starch, like a rice or a potato, and then it had like a brownie or a cookie. But think about that. Think about all those foods, different types of foods. And the whole idea was but they're all in this tray and they're all cooked at the same temperature for the same time, which when you look at it, go, wait a minute, because you don't make brownies and chicken. You know what I mean? It's like,
no,
somehow this worked, or at least worked in regard. And I can remember, I don't know if you had that going out. It's like, my parents are going out, so I get a TV dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that was, but again, if I had picked out that TV dinner, Swanson's, right? I can't remember anybody else who had a TV dinner. Maybe it was Swan. I'm sure there were different ones. I think they might even still exist.
They may have had the monopoly on TV dinners back in the day.
Yes, they may have. Whoever that Swanson guy was.
Yeah.
But that was the thing, right? The TV dinner was pretty sweet. And, again, but cook this at 350 for 25 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever it was. And, that was your thing.
Here's what it really was. This idea, like you said, Chris, perfect. A TV dinner. The idea that all of those different types of dishes should all be shoved in a microwave for a few minutes and somehow become a gourmet meal was ludicrous. And most of the TV dinners were really frozen blocks of, Paleolithic ice that came out of the freezer that always tasted watery and sloshy and gross and watered down. And don't even start me on the Salisbury steak TV dinner, which, by the way, Salisbury steak, just a really fancy way of saying, ladies and gentlemen, back to hamburger, right? It's always this buildup of hamburger and ground beef as being more than it was. I'm shocked that we didn't have ground beef lobster. I'm blown away that we didn't try to make that connection. But the TV dinner was such a great example of, we're almost there, people. Guess what? In the future, right? Somewhere later on in the 2000s, somewhere around 2014
when
or
we
15,
have space stations.
We're actually space stations. We're actually going to realize that it's not too hard to get this, buy healthy ingredients and actually make a proper meal. But back in the 70s and 80s, it's like, we don't even understand that. We don't even get that, right? We wouldn't know what a healthy ingredient was if you smacked us in the face with it. We have no clue. And so that's why Rice-A-Roni would come in and go, hey, a healthy thing is just a bag of chemicals you can add to rice. And people in San Francisco love it, whatever the fuck that means. And Hamburger Helper, right? Hey, man, do you guys enjoy tricyclohydroxymethylamino-methane and polydimethylamino-benzaldehyde? And
oh, Jesus.
Yeah, do you guys want that? No, of course not. What you want is a helper for the hamburger in a packet that you just stir in. Don't fucking worry what it's doing to your digestive system for the rest of your life or causing pancreatic cancer. It's Hamburger Helper. It's helping you eat hamburger, which again is going to be an ongoing theme for the rest of the time that you're in that house.
You need to pause for a second because I'm still trying to absorb that diatribe of the chemical names. That was amazing. I can't even call that a pull. That was something not of this earth. You're absolutely right. It was the same, and again, eventually the same reason they took lead out of paint or they took certain things out of food, certain ingredients, going, hey, this shit isn't what we thought it was, right? And it wasn't, but it was convenient, right? And everybody seemed to be, I guess, were they pressed for time more than we are now? I don't think so. People have a hell of a lot more going on now. And to the point, but like, here's a TV dinner, here's a frozen pizza, here's rice-a-roni and Hamburger Helper. So again, maybe just like everybody's expectations, like, man, those are some low fucking expectations of what you can do in your kitchen. So we're literally gonna help you out. As a matter of fact, it's gonna say help in the name, so you can just get it. It's like, oh, I've got hamburger and nothing else. God forbid I use like a bell pepper and some onions and maybe some garlic powder.
Yeah.
But here you go. It's in a box. Follow the instructions. Feed your kid. Okay. And then get ready to sit down and watch, I don't know, Room 222 or whatever the hell it was. So I think those things it's staggering to me to look at it. And again, the convenience of the food, because I think that was the number one objective, right? It wasn't the nutritional value. It wasn't the flavor.
No. Well, the flavor was allegedly the idea, but no. Yeah.
Right. It was convenient. I mean, microwaves blew up everything, literally, because of then it became, hey, the microwave, where you can do these, you can get a little even fancier. Now you even microwave. Screw it. You got to put that in your oven for 45 minutes. You can do this in your microwave in 3, right?
Yeah.
And so again, it's just like, God damn it, I need those 42 minutes. That is going to save me. And so I can throw this in the microwave. This is completely not of our generation. My grandparents never had, my grandparents married in, the 1930s. And, so definitely by the time a microwave came, they're married in the 30s, born in like the teens. So by the time microwaves came around, it was, again, it might as well have been the lunar module. But the family pitched in one year to buy the microwave for Christmas, and my grandmother decided she was going, this is so cool, this is so great. And she was telling you can make grandpa a hot dog. So she put it in the microwave and put it in, wrapped it in wax paper and cooked it for 20 minutes. Okay. Because, I hope that's enough time. Yes. That hot dog was like a Louisville Slugger when it came out of the microwave. It didn't blow up, didn't split. It was a piece of wood. Still a legendary story in my family. Because then again, even my grandma's just thinking, I can do this in 20 minutes. Great. And this is somebody who made great homemade food. And Sunday was all about fresh sauce and pasta and all that, and maybe eggplant and all these other things, none of which came out of any kind of helper box, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I just think looking at those, it's like I said, everybody was in a freaking hurry. And these were supposed to make everybody's life easier. And that, again, simplicity and speed were really the value proposition there, as opposed to anything else.
And I'm going to make a connection here that maybe this is the first time it ever occurred to me, but I have to believe that one of the reasons that people were in a hurry is entertainment after a long, hard day of work was a big deal. And back then, if you were spending too much time in the kitchen preparing stuff, or people didn't get their dinner out of the way, they were going to miss MASH or All in the Family, right? Or Rhoda or whatever. And so there was a schedule. You're back from school. Mom typically is going to make the meal. She needs help to make this as quickly and easily as possible.
That's
so
right.
that everybody can plop down in front of the TV and make sure that everybody is watching their favorite show at their favorite time with either a hot meal in front of you of some sort, or at the very least, no interruption, right? So I feel like that played a huge part in it, right? There was maybe TV execs got together with General Mills. I have no
Oh, they
idea.
absolutely did.
Yeah, but
Right,
it just
right.
seems like that was the plan, right? Largely. And
Think about the
yeah,
TV tray, which was so you put your TV dinner on your TV tray and you eat dinner in front of the TV.
yeah,
And man, you are set. You are living life, right? And again, and you had to watch the show, which you couldn't record, right? Which you couldn't stream the next day,
right.
right? Which you couldn't just pull up on demand if so you had that show was on, man, you were going to miss it. You were going to miss it, right? And maybe you could see it again in the summer, but then that's just if you happen to see it in the summer. So no, the stakes, no pun intended, were high in the regard. Like, hey, we've got to get, you're right, the speed and the simplicity because we have this, this routine that the modern American family. But let me ask you this though, because again, a routine that blew up for me, and this was just a product of the times when I don't know how old I was. I never saw my dad cook anything.
Oh,
Ever.
God.
Except like on a Sunday, yes, at the grill, a hamburger, a hot dog, doing, dad, Pops is doing the barbecue. Something happened. I think my mom, because my mom started working and then there was like a working schedule, it's this and that. So my dad, and she still got it home in time, but my dad decided I'm going to help out. I'm going to make some food. I'm going to make a meal. I'm going to cook. And his Spam, I mentioned Spam, Spam in a cast iron skillet and no flavoring, no seasoning, no side dish. Here's just some kind of grilled and, of course, overcooked and burned and crispy and crunchy Spam. Okay. And that was dinner. It's like, thanks, Dad. As I'm trying to feed it to the dog.
Yeah.
And then he got the idea of like, the paper, the newspaper bag is like Thursday would be like the food section and all the ads for the supermarkets. And so he said, well, here's recipes. And again, my mom would try to say, cook this, make this. There's that in the cupboard, there's whatever. But no, that was because he thought I can do this better. And he didn't say it, but he definitely acted like this. He made this meal and I remember this to the day where it was, and he went to the store and made sure he had the ingredients. It was Polish sausage, sauerkraut, and cheese wrapped in a tortilla.
Mother of God.
And it was like, are you trying to kill me? Are you trying to get me to develop an eating disorder?
Yeah.
What are you trying to make a statement that you're not happy about cooking? So you're going to intentionally, you're going to take a dive. And it was none of those things, right? Because my dad, and would be like, oh, you're fine. Just eat it. Pipe down. I don't want to hear it. Right. The typical dad stuff, the typical, turn that music down, get off my lawn, whatever, pick that up kind of thing that we got from our dads back in that generation. But it was god awful. I remember this to this day, like it was yesterday, that was plopped down and I was supposed to eat it.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there. And by the way, maybe some people listening to this have dads that were the opposite. They actually helped in the kitchen. They were actually supportive of their wife coming home and being tired or not having time to do that. And maybe they were even good chefs, but not my dad. The worst.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, your dad was Julia Childs compared to my dad. My dad would not understand how to cook a meal if his life effing depended on it. He would just, like cook a steak and burn it and then put peanut butter on it and then call that a meal and probably just eat it himself, and then you could get leftovers if you could find some of it. So anyway, yeah, to say that he was not good in the kitchen is an understatement. But back in the day, that was pretty common, right? Is that just nobody was going to help out. Your poor mom, by and large, was the only person that was going to be able to accomplish that task for the entire family. But the best part of your story, Chris, is the fact that your dad decided that Polish sausage and the cheese, by the way, which rarely go together.
Sauerkraut
and cheese.
Wrapped in a tortilla. I don't know if this was a We Are the World kind of like rainbow coalition sort of, because think the origins of those food. Okay.
Yeah, that's the thing I was going to say is it's the icing on the cake really is the tortilla. The fact that he thought a tortilla would be, or the recipe thought a tortilla.
recipe.
By the way,
Right.
please tell me that recipe was not written by another dad. It clearly was. There was some other dad that wrote that recipe.
It was in the newspaper. It was published.
It was probably the editor of the fucking newspaper that wrote it. And of course, that had to be a guy because women weren't allowed to have that lofty of a position, right? Where they're actually, making sure that the news is presented properly. God forbid a woman should be able to do that, right? So anyway, going back to the tortilla, the abomination of our version of what Mexican food is back in the 70s and 80s, to this day, it's almost a war crime. Because back in the day, especially here in Southern California, when we had, very close access to the most amazing food on the planet, our version of that played out in supermarkets and on television and in fast food chains was just horrific for the longest time. To this day, all we have, right, as a remembrance of that horrible time is Taco Bell, which, by the way, don't get me wrong, I love Taco Bell, but that is not Mexican food. Please don't ever make that mistake, right? That is silly to make that. By the way, in Mexico, you're going to have a hard time finding an enchilado gordita, right? I don't think they, did they invent gorditas in South America, Mexico, or even in Spain? No, sir. The gordita does not exist, right? That is an imaginary word. May as well have been in a Dr. Seuss book. My point being is that, thank God, right? Eventually, at least here in Southern California, we started getting authentic Mexican restaurants and fast food chains like Alberto's and Roberto's and all these different offshoots of the Berto family. Yeah. Where this is what you want in a burrito: carne asada and fresh shrimp. And don't even start me on rolled tacos, and don't even start me on machaca. And the famous item down here, the flying saucer, which is just this crispy tortilla with all these beautiful fresh ingredients on it, served up lightning fast for back in the day, under $5. And that is authentic Mexican food. But our version of it, God bless my mom, God bless her heart, her version of it was just not good, to put it bluntly. She made these things called sour cream burritos. Don't get me wrong. You could eat them. They were, okay tasting, but it was the same thing, right? It wasn't the same kind of meat. It certainly wasn't marinated or flavored correctly. It was in a tortilla shell that was usually overcooked and a bit dry, and then glopped with sour cream with basically no spices or seasoning. And we're like, hey, man, beef in a tortilla with sour cream. Yay. And then later we would learn, oh, wait, it's really not Mexican food at all. That's just a loose interpretation,
Well, first off, all excellent points. Shout out back to the rolled taco, as opposed to calling it taquito, which I argue to people to this day, saying, no, it's a rolled taco. It's not a taquito. Okay. Yeah. And that's one of the things that sort of just shifted and was Americanized. And now I think people do refer to it, but it was a rolled taco. Give me 5 rolled tacos with sour cream and guacamole and cheese. Taco Bell was actually, did you know that was actually founded by a guy named Gene Bell? That's the guy's name. It wasn't had to do. So then they had the bell as their logo with like a little, then also, if you remember the original, with like this guy, it would like a sarape and a big sombrero, like taking a siesta, because that's what they do, because they're lazy and they sleep and then they get up and they eat, right? All of the stereotypes. And then to even call it Taco Bell, right? Because it was founded by a guy named, I think, Gene or Glenn or something. Anyway.
Yeah.
But you're right. And Taco Bell has its place. If, first of all, if it's the middle of the night, if you're in an airport and you're on a way to catch a flight, perfectly acceptable, right? If you're in the middle of nowhere, and it's either Taco Bell or, I don't know, maybe something else that's, another option. Burger King, I'm going to go Taco Bell every day of the week, right? If I'm traveling on the road. Or, again, I was like shuttling my daughter back and forth to my various sort of parental obligations because she can't drive herself. And in the middle of the two, it's like, yeah, you got to eat. You're hungry. There's Taco Bell. We're going to hit that drive-through. It's cheap and it's fast and it's actually not bad. It's not your first choice. It's not sitting at home going, you want Mexican food? Yeah, let's go to Taco Bell. To your point, you're not.
Yeah.
But for the circumstance, it works. Okay. But
Yeah.
I think that, but see, I was fortunate enough, despite my dad's attempts at, sauerkraut and Polish sausage and Spam, there was another one that involved.
Don't forget, wrap it in a tortilla, Chris.
Right. And there's another one that I will just that was involved ham, cream cheese, and pickles. And I'm just going to let it go with that one because I don't even want to get into the detail. All of those I like, ham, cream cheese, and pickles, not together. But that's another anecdote. I didn't have time for that one in the sense. But I was fortunate enough because, again, along with the convenience of all this stuff, is then you also had your SpaghettiOs, right? And your Chef Boyardee and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And deviled ham. Wasn't there also, there was the deviled ham, another one that was like on a shelf and it was prepared some sort, and it was kind of like a brat, or not a bratwurst, like a liverwurst or something, right? But like I was fortunate being half Italian, we couldn't eat SpaghettiOs were banned from my house. We didn't eat sauce out of a jar. I was fortunate in that regard. It's like I didn't eat sauce out of a jar until I had to buy it on my own when I wanted to make pasta myself when I was like 20 years old. And I'm like, all right, I don't have any sauce. My mom's not going to make me dinner. So, but all of those things and again, and I almost wore that as a badge of honor. It's like, yeah, although I wanted to try it, it's like, I've never had SpaghettiOs, Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried those SpaghettiOs, which are freaking god awful.
Yeah.
Right. But those
they
things.
are, I would say they are deliciously the worst. But when I say deliciously, I just mean, Chris, I was kind of weaned on those things for years. I would eat SpaghettiOs and Chef Boyardee and the little raviolios and all that. And there's something comforting about the chemicals in that sauce that if you weren't born and bred on it, then you may not know. But whatever chemical combination is in those, there is a comfort to it, but it is god awful. Yeah, it is not meant for human consumption typically, any more than McDonald's is. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, still deal with stuff that is mass produced, but I think there's just a little bit more care and a little more, I don't know, in the sense of a little more preparation, and I don't know, it's just different. Thank God, but we're alive, right?
Well, we are. And I would say largely, Chris, the reason you and I are still alive is that we're largely preserved. Certainly, I can add an extra 3 years to my life just based on whatever chemicals were in Boo Berry cereal. I think that alone probably, in Peanut Butter Captain Crunch, that probably alone will keep me, if nothing else, embalmed when I do finally pass away. But
so did you have cereal freedom then? Because my cereal intake was pretty normal, but it was regulated as all hell. Like I wanted Fruit Loops and I wanted Captain Crunch and all of those things, but no, I had to have no sugar. If I wanted sugar on my cereal, I had to add it to on the sly. Right.
I had two parents that would work mostly full time. And I was also the kid that came along late in life. Like I mentioned, my siblings are 13 and 16 years older. So lucky for me, I was largely left to my own devices. And so I had a pretty good selection there. My mom would typically let me go with her to the grocery store and choose the things that I wanted. And what I wanted was always the worst, right? Anything with artificial peanut flavoring was usually my first go-to. Peanut Butter Captain Crunch to this day is my favorite cereal flavor of all time. And the other thing that I love that was peanut flavored on that topic would be space food sticks, right? Because we all were going to have a vision of the future and everything was going to be very different. I think we're going to be touching on this in a future episode, right? Which is, by the way, pardon the pun, but I think we're going to be talking about the vision of the future later. But space food sticks, this is what the astronauts ate. And it's basically just a really sugary, soft Tootsie Roll. And I guess that's what the astronauts used. Presumably it's something that squirt out of a toothpaste tube and you would eat it or something, right? But man, a peanut butter space food stick, I was in heaven. And the other thing was, for a limited amount of time in stores, Chris, you could get novelty peanut butter. I think, do you remember the novelty peanut butter?
I remember one. It's ironically enough, I want to say it was called like Google or Googly, where it was like flavored peanut butter. Which, when you think about it, but peanut is the flavor. But at the same time, it's like when it's yes, I remember that, and I also remember one that was like peanut butter and jelly in the same jar.
Yeah.
Right. So and I don't even know I don't even.
Well, I'm
not even
gonna help you out on that. You're so close. It was Goober, Goober, Goobers. Yes.
Okay.
And Goober's peanut butter was peanut butter and jelly in the same jar, already mixed together for you, and it displayed as stripes of jelly when you looked at that jar.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and then you had Kraft came out with types of peanut butter that was chocolate flavored peanut butter, banana flavored peanut butter that tasted more like caramel or whatever it was. But anyway, I can't even imagine there's many chemicals in that at all. But I'm just so addicted to peanut butter. Yeah,
it was all the same philosophy, right? It was cutting out the middleman and saving you 30 seconds by, I don't want to have a jar of peanut butter and a jar of jelly.
Yeah.
Right. And have to first mix the two. No, I can just do it all in one knife, right? With one jar, and boom, I'm done. The flavored peanut butter, again, peanuts is the flavor. It's like those flavored coffees. It's like, no, I just want coffee. Coffee is the flavor. Okay. I don't need, so those, and again, much like they had, and it was all the powdery stuff, getting back to your future-ish kind of thing. When we talk about, there was instant coffee like Senka, there was Tang. And I don't know if we mentioned Tang, because we'll talk about it soon, because that was they pitched that as like, this is what the astronauts drink. It's like, no, no, not Tang. But somehow, because it goes like an orange powder full of probably those same chemicals you rattled off. You put that in a glass with what you mix it with water, and there you go. It's probably not even 10%. It was probably 0% juice. Wasn't even 10% juice.
I'm not saying we were experts on nutrition and health back in the 60s, but I'm going to guess that the nutritionists that were part of the NASA, Tiger team working on the Apollo mission did not think that orange flavored sugar was going to be a good thing to give to the astronauts when they're out there in space. Probably had more nutrient value and electrolytes and stuff in the original version of it that the astronauts got. But the version I got sure tasted fucking good, I'll tell you that. But I think, Chris, we can basically say, in general, right? The food tasted pretty damn good. It wasn't healthy. We didn't even know how to make healthy food for the most part. There was a vibe in the 70s and 60s of organic, doing your own thing, being a hippie, but it was going to be a big life choice to be able to do that. It wasn't made easy by places like Trader Joe's or Sprouts, right? You didn't have places like that to go to. And largely, as we talked about, it really just had to do with, I don't have a lot of time. I just came home, and guess what? We got to watch Barnaby Jones, right? Or Barney Miller, or name another Barney. Barney. No, I don't know.
Barney
that's
Rubble.
3 Barneys.
I don't know.
Or Barney Rubble. There you go. Why did I just come up with 4 Barneys? I have no idea. But Barney Fife. Oh my God, I'm on a roll. I can't stop. Give me another Barney. Holy moly. That's a lot of Barneys.
I don't know. I'm out of Barney.
But there we go. It was an innocent time. Thank God food has definitely improved. Health has definitely improved. And there you go. And Chris, I'll leave you with this thought, which was the exact same thought I had going back to the beginning of this episode when I saw that photo of my grandma's open house. What did I see off in the distance, Chris? I saw that little bowl of hard candy that would be right there at the door, right? As people walked in, grab a hard candy. And Chris, I want to leave this episode with you telling me what happened when you grabbed one of those hard candies out of that bowl and lifted it up.
It was generally stuck, right, to the other candies.
That's right. Yes, exactly.
In the bowl, right. So you couldn't grab just one. And to that point, which makes is like, okay, how long have these candies been here? Number one. Number two, what flavor did you want? There was nothing even remotely like, I'm going to dig through this. This is some sort of gesture by my grandparent So it's like it's a candy. It's a rock hard. Brock's candy, I think, was the leader in that
Oh,
regard, and there was
gross.
nothing. It
No.
wasn't a Jolly. These were not Jolly Ranchers. These were not Now and Laters.
No.
Right? These were nothing of those, or these were not Milk Duds or Rolos.
Rolos. Oh my God. That's 30,000 points right there.
Right? Or even Hershey's Kisses, which would be worth your time. So I'm going to grab this dish, and the dish itself would come up almost sometimes with that hunk of Brock's.
It would.
And I'm gonna maybe pick off one, and then maybe I'm going to pretend to eat it. But at the same time, maybe it was all calculated. Maybe that was the idea. Is they're trying? It was sort of like an anti-smoking campaign. It was an anti-candy campaign. Hey, I've got candy. Try some Brock's. But we knew better. Thank God we knew better. And again, we're here. We survived the Brock's. Again, probably stuck it in my pocket. Probably, or if I managed to unwrap, you couldn't even unwrap it, right? Because it was so stuck together. It's like eventually I'm going to have to stick this thing in my mouth with half of the cellophane on it, right? Because everything was stuck together. And you pretend to eat it, and then the first chance you got, it was in the trash or in a bush, or if you were really desperate. Because I did this once, and it was in my pocket, and then the tough skins got in the wash, and it was a mess. But you wouldn't eat it. You sure as hell wouldn't eat it. But maybe that was the idea.
Occasionally I would get so desperate and I would eat one, and you're talking about ones that were wrapped. I mean the ones that weren't even wrapped, and everyone put their grubby fingers on it, and it's totally disgusting. And by the way, the worst flavor of all, and I would like to leave this image in everyone's mind, and maybe you can all relate to this as the last part of this episode, which is the purple Brax hard candy. And if you mother effing dared to put that thing in your mouth, you just got a mouthful of perfume. That's the only way I could explain it. Have I ever sprayed perfume in my own mouth? No. But if I had, that's exactly what it would have tasted like. There has never on the planet Earth been a more artificial flavor than a purple Brax hard candy. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. The end.
Good God, Jeff. I can't top that.
All right, Chris, until next time.
Till next time, Jeff.